So last week, I posted a couple of videos where I explained the true situation behind video game piracy and emulation, and tried to explain how game piracy isn't nearly as harmless as a lot of game pirates think it is. Today, I'd like to make my third and what I hope to be my final video discussing this topic. What's up guys, Acerthorn here, and welcome to another video game industry discussion video. I do these analysis and discussion videos on a regular basis, so if you'd like to see more of them, hit that subscribe button to stay notified. Also, if you enjoy my content, please either whitelist my channel from your ad blocker, or consider supporting me directly either on Patreon or with channel memberships. So as I posted my second video on this topic, several people noticed some of my comments on Reddit, where I said that because I wasn't enjoying Hollow Knight right out of the gate, I was going to refund the game on Steam, and then just play a torrented version of the game, so I could try it out risk-free. Now, bear in mind that, in that instance, I was not advocating for simply pirating the game and just having it without ever paying for it. I very clearly expressed an interest in rebuying the game if it ended up being good. So that alone puts me head and shoulders above guys like The Department, or Sonic Kyle 27 in the ethics department. Of course, we also need to understand that I had made the decision to torrent the game as a trial before I even posted the first game piracy video. Recall in my Hollow Knight's first impressions video that I went to the Hollow Knight subreddit for advice on what I'm supposed to do. It was actually in that thread, which I posted before I posted my first game piracy video, that I made the decision to torrent as a trial. Now, why is that such a big deal? Well, take a look at the title of my first game piracy video. Specifically, take a look at these two words right here. See, I made the decision to do that back when I still felt there were some merits to doing it. Well, after I posted my first game piracy video and started to promote it on various message boards, the level of self-entitlement I found by so many of these game pirates, and the degree to which they had their heads up their asses, really made me see that game piracy really does deserve to be the crime it is. See, prior to this, my only interactions with game pirates and their apologists came in small, infrequent occurrences. Many of them, such as Jim Sterling, attempted to argue their own justifications for game piracy. I presumed that many of these arguments were in good faith, and so my initial video was meant to invoke a similar amount of good faith regarding game piracy. But then, when we started to promote the video on message boards, I started to realize through my interactions with these people that no, the vast majority of game pirates aren't simply attempting to circumvent DRM restrictions that only inconvenience the paying customers. To the contrary, the overwhelming majority of game pirates, at least in my observations, simply felt entitled to play these games because fuck you, we're entitled to it. And the vast majority of them weren't even pretending like there was anything more to it than that. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what prompted me to make my second video. The one that ended up getting quite a lot of rolling eyes because I was supposedly acting immature. Of course, by that point, I had abandoned my presumption of good faith and had lost respect for the overwhelming majority of game pirates. So of course this time around I was going to be a bit more cynical towards them, since they had squandered the presumption of good faith that I had afforded them in the first video. So anyway, after realizing just how widespread the attitude is of pirating the game with absolutely no moral justification to it whatsoever, spoilers, it's actually a lot more common than you think, I did a little bit of self-reflection and asked myself how I can have the best of both worlds. How can I, with a clear conscience, try the game out risk-free without simply being part of the problem. I concluded that the best way to do this was to both purchase and torrent the game at the same time. That much is perfectly legal, I'm still financially supporting the game, so it's still perfectly ethical, and US copyright law allows me to make personal backup copies of copyrighted works. And even the instruction manuals of minigames outright give the end users permission to make personal backup copies. Of course, some people just can't leave well enough alone. Many people, most of whom deleted their comments so I couldn't respond to them, decided to act all haughty and say that downloading a ROM is illegal even if you own a legal copy of the game. Never mind the fact that my previous two videos were primarily focused on arguing the ethics of game piracy, not the legality of it, but let's not get in the way of these people's determination to call me a hypocrite no matter what. For the few that didn't immediately delete their comments, I replied and asked them to back up their arguments with sources. They refused to provide these sources. I mean, calling me a hypocrite is one thing, but actually backing up your accusations with evidence? Hell no, that's too much work. Just like how it's apparently too much work to actually watch my videos in order to understand my positions before you retort against those positions, apparently. Lazy fucks. Ugh, fine. Let's do a Google search for, is it legal to download a ROM of a game you own? Well, I found not one, but two search results that I'd like to talk about today. The first one comes from the website of howtogeek.com and was writing about an interview they had with a law professor at the University of Arizona College of Law. This article explains that my proposed solution, buying the game legally and downloading it for some form of convenience, in my case to sidestep around Valve's restrictive refund policy, could be considered fair use. The keywords here being could be. The problem is that this fair use defense is entirely theoretical. In order for any solid precedent on the issue to be created, the case would have to go to court, and the game companies hold all the cards in that respect. The game companies, and only the game companies, have to make the first move by filing a lawsuit against you. Then, and only then, do you get to officially raise the defense of fair use. The problem there is that it is extremely rare for individual users of ROMs to get sued for game piracy, and cases where the defendant is able to prove that he purchased the game legally before or alongside pirating it, yet the game company chooses to sue them anyway, is an even more astronomical occurrence among an already rare instance of individual ROM users being sued in the first place. Thus, much like the question of whether Let's Plays are fair use, this question of law is still up in the air. Of course, one thing I found especially interesting about this interview with the lawyer is that he basically repeats the exact same sentiments regarding the tangible harm that game piracy inflicts on intellectual property that I mentioned in my first video on game piracy, including but not limited to the part where ROM sites operate primarily by creating new copies rather than redistributing existing ones, which is the whole reason it's called copyright law in the first place, and the part where unauthorized availability of games reduces the market value for them when the game companies are ready to re-release them. So there it is in black and white. A lot of you found my arguments in the first video rather unpersuasive, since you saw the harm to the game's market value to be indirect at best and purely hypothetical at worst. Well, if you won't take my word for it, how about the word of an actual lawyer? And for the record, I didn't know about this article when I made the first video on game piracy. Those arguments were entirely my original thoughts, and then it just so happens that some actual attorneys felt exactly the same way, independently of me. And now it's time for the main event. So people often complain that they pirate games because obtaining used copies of games is way too expensive. Well, while researching for this video, I discovered that there is indeed an emulation website out there that is, in fact, perfectly legal. It's called Console Classics, and the company's owner claims that it was set up under the advice of legal counsel so as to ensure full compliance with all applicable laws. Console Classics claims to be able to avoid copyright infringement in the first instance by not actually allowing its customers to download the ROMs per se. First, the ROMs were ripped directly from legal copies of game cartridges and discs. After that, the ROMs are transmitted to individual clients using the Console Classics Windows app. However, instead of the ROMs being downloaded to the computer's hard drive, they are only loaded into the customer's ROM, and the customer loses access to the ROM if the connection between the customer and the Console Classics servers is ever lost. So it's basically like Google Stadia but for retro games. Using this method of delivery, the business owner claims that his service is legally indistinguishable from various video game rental services, like what Blockbuster used to do before it went under. Now, if you're thinking that this sounds like a little too good to be true, and that there's no way a business model like this wouldn't be completely commonplace if this really were legal, well, they claim that they have had cease and desist letters sent to them, and they told Nintendo to shove it up their asses. So they clearly seem fairly confident in the legality of their business model. Best of all, their service is reasonably priced. For the price of only one AAA game per year, you can have access to their entire library of more than 7,000 games. Damn, just 2,000 more and we'll break a scouter. Of course, if even that is too much for your blood, you can stream their Atari 2600, ColecoVision, and NES ROMs for free. So people like the department argue that used copies of Castlevania 5 on eBay are way too expensive. Well, you don't have that excuse anymore, because Castlevania 5 is one of the games offered by Console Classics for a very reasonable subscription fee. Now, in all fairness, this service is not perfect. One of the biggest problems with this emulation service is that there is no support for any of the PlayStation or Xbox consoles, nor is there any support for the Sega Saturn or Dreamcast. The Nintendo 64 is the only 3D console supported by the service, and it doesn't appear that they will be adding support for any new consoles anytime soon, seeing as how "when are you going to add a new console" is one of the preset subjects in the contact form, so clearly they must get asked that question a lot. Fortunately, we just need to think outside the box a little bit. Think about it, guys. If this business model is legal, then that means it's legal for everyone. In other words, literally anyone and their mother can set up a similar emulation service as long as they follow the Console Classics business model. And if the game publishers can't stop you from doing it, well, what have you got to lose? So all we really need is to make enough noise to let other people with massive collections of medium-aged games know that there is a lucrative business opportunity awaiting them if they were so inclined to tap into that market. If there's enough of a market for medium-aged emulator games, surely someone will swoop in and fill that demand. Hell, considering that this is basically Google Stadia but for retro titles, maybe we can ask Google to start offering this emulation service. They've got the resources to hoard the legal copies of the games that are needed for this business model to be legal, and their Google Stadia service shows that they are currently interested in entering the business of games as a service. Maybe this business model can replace Google Stadia in much the same way that YouTube replaced Google Video. The business model could also be used to give us unofficial, yet still perfectly legal, re-releases of games that are in limbo because of licensing disputes. For example, in Jim Sterling's video, Nintendo, the Industry and the Attack on Emulators, Sterling offers the Alien vs. Predator arcade game as an example of the kind of game where the rights to a potential re-release are split across multiple companies. Well, if more people utilized this business model for their ROM sites, we could have legal access to that arcade game and so many others that can't be re-released due to rights issues, and the rights holders can't do diddly squat to stop it. So now, you no longer have an excuse for illegal game piracy to play old retro games. The games, at least for 2D and N64 consoles, are readily available, they're reasonably priced, and it's perfectly legal. At least until a court unambiguously orders Console Classics to shut itself down. Even if there are games you want to play that Console Classics doesn't currently provide, we just need to convince someone else to start offering it, and we are no longer reduced to relying on the whim and sole discretion of the game companies who have their own agendas and who may not even have the rights to re-release the games even if they wanted to. So, I'm sorry, emulator apologists, but you're shit out of luck and shit out of excuses now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, after 3 videos, I have to say that I am nice and tired of this subject. I will not hesitate to make a 4th video showing how scummy you are if I really need to, but quite frankly, I hope I don't have to. We had a good run with this topic, but it's time for me to make videos about something else. So until next time, I bid you all adieu. Ace Sir Thorn out. Peace!